Hello, this recording is for anyone who is interested in the sabbatical process and who want a more video walkthrough of the handbook here. So you'll notice this handbook is for Merit College application year 2022 to 2023 for sabbaticals in 2023 to 2024. If you're watching this recording anytime in the future, such as application year 2023 to 2024, then this video might still be partially applicable, but keep in mind that procedures and forms are always possible to have changed. So follow up with the current PDC or Professional Development Committee chair for the most current and up-to-date information. So first of all, what the purpose of sabbatical is to provide leave, an extended leave with pay to a limited number of faculty to advance or modify your skill set in order to benefit the district, college, the students, and yourself, of course, too. And there is some specificity here. So this is going to be the Merit College guide. Every college in the district might have slightly different forms and procedures, although they all have the same backbone. And so if you're applying for sabbatical at Merit, you definitely want to watch this video or attend the orientations with regards to Merit sabbaticals, not the Laney or BCC or Alameda, College of Alameda ones. And I just wanted to make a quick note that we are pretty lucky to have sabbaticals. Not all professions get the opportunity to take a sabbatical leave, and not even all college districts do them either. And also, it's important to note that to not assume that sabbaticals will always be available like they are this year. In times of hardship, financial hardship, the districts can and they have taken sabbaticals away as an option for those years. So if they're available, don't hesitate to apply if you're interested. So what we're going to do is just going to cover the basics, the kind of more vital things, and not go over every little detail here. And I'm just going to comment on some of the things, maybe to talk about a little bit that's not written down and give some tips. So firstly, let's look at the application process overview. And I just wanted to highlight this here. And actually, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so it's easy to read. Great, there we go. So I want to highlight this. The recommendations from the Professional Development Committee will go through several layers of review and approval, including the college president, the chancellor's office, and the board of trustees. Ultimately, the final decision lies with the board of trustees. So this is important because sometimes people will accidentally think, okay, if I got approved, if I send my application to the PDC and they recommend me for sabbatical, then I'm good or I'm done. But unfortunately, while we are a vital first step in the application process, there are those other layers. The president has to approve you, the chancellor's office has to approve you, and the board of trustees has to approve you. And then at that point, there will be a sabbatical leave contract, and that is finally when you can settle in and be and know that you were awarded a sabbatical. So there is more information about the timeline of this process later in the handbook, and we'll briefly cover some points of that as well in this video. The other thing I want to highlight is eligibility. So to be considered for a sabbatical, you need to have been employed by Merit College for at least 6 years, and those years have to be consecutive too. There's often questions about, what if you take a leave in the middle of that, such as a medical leave? So a medical leave will not mess up or break that consecutive year sequence, but it won't count towards the 6 years either. So for example, you could take, you could be working for Merit College for 4 years straight, then you take an approved medical leave, say for X amount of time, and then work for another 2 years, and you would meet your six consecutive year criteria for eligibility here. So approved leaves act sort of like a pause button. Quick note too, if you take banked leave, if you're aware of what that is, um, bank leave still counts towards your consecutive year of service. So if you happen to take banked leave for a semester, that still counts. And that's in the PFT contract. A little bit about the application and selection process. This is probably the biggest chunk of what we're going to cover here today because I want to make sure that people understand how to apply. Um, so the deadline for 2022 for applications to be sent into the PDC chair is November 15th. Of course, if you're watching this video in the future, make sure you're looking at the most up-to-date handbook for the correct deadline. So there's two things at least that you need for sure, and a third thing that you pretty much need, but it's not, I guess, kind of depends how you put that in there. Some people infuse this third thing into part two, but you need at least two things, and that is the sabbatical leave application part one, which is your request form, and the part two of the application, which is the project proposal. We'll go over each of those in more detail in just a moment, but I wanted to note that this third bullet point is any relevant supporting materials, such as letters of institutional support, letters of acceptance into a program, etc. This is if this is a required material, you need to have some sort of letters of support. Optimally, those who support your project will write a letter saying why they support you and why they think it'll benefit the college. That's in contrast to getting people to just say, I support John's sabbatical. I support this person's sabbatical. Right? So you just don't want people saying, I support them. Optimally, they would write a letter and explain why they support you. Some people will infuse those letters into part two as like a sort of addendum or in the front of it. So kind of just depends, but or you can just attach it separately. So two or three things that will be part of your application in that sense. So let's look at the first part, sabbatical request form. That's going to be on page 5 of this handbook. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll there. So you could just print this part out when you're filling it out and submit it to the chair. So of course some basics will be needed here. Of course, years of service, we want to know that there's enough years of service, that there's at least 6 there. This is for, to be eligible, you need to be tenured. So knowing when your tenure was granted is going to be important. Knowing if you've taken a sabbatical in the past is important because you can't take a sabbatical, you can't take 2 sabbaticals in a row, for example. There's a 6-year gap between sabbaticals. So that's why we're looking for that there. For type of leave, this is sort of just to check what type of sabbatical you might be envisioning for yourself. So some people might be leaning more towards coursework, so you can go ahead and check that box. Or maybe even you have travel involved in your sabbatical as well as coursework, then you can go ahead and check both of the boxes. Or if yours doesn't fall into any of them, then you can check the other box and specify. So time requested, you have actually different options for your sabbatical. You can take a sabbatical for 1 semester at 100% salary for the fall semester, let's say in this case. At the time of the recording, this is for fall 2023. You can choose the 1 semester sabbatical with 100% salary for the spring semester instead, or you can opt for a full year sabbatical, so fall and spring. The downside is that the salary will be reduced to 66.66%. All benefits will be retained the same way, however. You won't get 66% of your benefits. You'll get 100% of your benefits still, but that salary will get cut by a third. So sometimes there's questions about, is there a preference for, will I get approved more likely if I take a 1 semester sabbatical versus a full semester or full year sabbatical? Are my chances increased or decreased? So it's going to really depend on your project, is I think the answer here. So if your project is really intensive and requires a year, you have to really prove in your proposal that it really does need a year. Otherwise, it could hurt your chances of being recommended for sabbatical leave, because if you are saying you want a whole full year and your project doesn't seem very intensive, then it just seems like the district isn't going to like that, right? Um, they're not going to want to pay for you to be on leave for that long. So it could hurt your chances if your project isn't intensive for a full year. Um, so that's probably the only thing I'm aware of to say right here about that. All right, so that's pretty much the gist of part one, the request form. Part two is the sabbatical project proposal. So this is going to be the big bulk of the project. So let's go to page 6. All right, so there's a couple instructions here, as well as some recommendations. So there's going to be first a cover sheet for the proposal. So on that first page, you just want to make sure to include the following. So pretty straightforward there. And then on the second page of your proposal, that's where you're going to start writing the main portion of your sabbatical project. So you want to start with a brief abstract. This is important because the Board of Trustees is going to be presented with this abstract, and this abstract is also going to be more widely available on the website. So you want to make sure it's of good quality so that people who are curious about what you're up to can kind of get an understanding of what you're doing and the importance of it. Also, starting on that second page, you can start writing your plan of work. And to help guide you in writing that plan of work, there are some criteria um, in step 1 review form, and there's also criteria in the step 2 ranking form that you should be looking at throughout writing your sabbatical project proposal in order to be approved um, or to be competitive for approval. We'll go over those things in a couple minutes as well. And just a note to save your file a specific way, just to make things easy for us to track. There's some word count recommendations. So if you're curious about how long your proposal should be, most effective proposals have been around 1,500 words, but there's no minimum, there's no maximum. But just keep in mind, you don't want yours to be excessively long, because just like how when we're grading student papers, and it gets excessively long over what we would like to grade, maybe you get a little bit bored of reading it, or it just seems like it's redundant. So keep that in mind. Make sure your writing is concise and it gets to the point, but still details everything that you need the committee to know when they're reading your proposal. And at the very end here, there's a note just how to complete your fully finished sabbatical application. So, part 1, part 2, as well as any relevant letters of support, right? So you want to send that to the chair of the Professional Development Committee, and I recommend to CC yourself to make sure you have a backup in your records. All right, so going back to application process. So there's the selection process that we're talking about next. So there's a 2-step process for proposal selection. The first step is where each application is going to be screened by 3 faculty and 3 administrators sitting on the PDC. And in this first step, there's going to be 5 criteria that the PDC is looking for. And those 5 criteria are detailed in the step 1 sabbatical review form, which is the form that the PDC will be using to make sure that the individuals are meeting these criteria. they're summarized as these five below, but we're actually going to go straight to the form, which is a little bit more detailed. Step one, right here, step one sabbatical review form. So for example, if I'm on the PDC and I'm reviewing sabbatical proposals, I'll write your applicant name there, the date that it is that I'm reviewing you, and I'm going to be determining is your statement of purpose clear? Is there some institutional support? It could be coming from faculty, staff, administrators, support from across the departments, divisions, programs, maybe even support from people outside of the college, perhaps. Anything that I mean, as long as you have something of some sort of support, then I can circle yes, and you'll be able to progress to the next stage. I'm going to also be looking for, or whoever's on those three faculty and three administrators on the PDC are wanting to make sure that your purpose is achievable. So, for example, if you want to learn new skills and knowledge, there should be some maybe evidence of acceptance into a program, especially if you're trying to finish a PhD or something like that. We want to make sure that you're actually in the program, um, or that there's some mechanism to get you into the program, so that we're not worried about that part, because we don't want proposals to be stuck on one difficult part and then the rest of the project can't happen because of it. We'll also be looking for the project having a clear and identifiable result. That's kind of open to interpretation a little bit, but maybe that means that something's going to be measurable at the end. Maybe it means something concrete that's made for your students or for the department that you're in, etc. And lastly, a method to measure completion. So that's also a little bit up to interpretation, but something to concretely say or discreetly say that you are done with your project. There it is. So if the faculty members and administrators believe you've passed step one, they'll circle yes here, and they'll write their name and sign off on it. And then all the three faculty and three administrators have to agree that yes, you've met all of those 5 steps in order for your proposal to enter step 2 of the application selection process. So going back to the initial page here, we're looking at the application selection process. So at the second step of screening, what's going to happen? Well, each application that's made it to the second step is going to be scored by the same individuals, those 3 faculty and 3 administrators. By the way, these are all being individually screened. We're not gathering into groups and doing it all together, but individually ranking the forms to make sure that there's agreement. So these 6 members are going to individually score the applications based on 7 criteria now, and they're going to be scored from 0 to 15 in general on those 7 criteria. And the applicant must achieve a minimum final score of 80 to be placed in a pool of applicants to be considered for sabbatical leave. And we'll look at that form in just a moment, but I just want to quickly note that after you get your final score out of 100, of course you have to have the minimum of 80. So if you achieve that minimum score, then applicants in the pool will be ranked in order of final score, and the applicant with the highest score is the one that we will recommend to the president of the college for sabbatical. And if there's more than one sabbatical available, like there is for this year, we got 2 sabbaticals available at merit, then more than one applicant will be recommended, just depending on how many sabbaticals we have. And if there happens to be a tie in the score, then seniority will be used to break that tie. So let's go into step 2 sabbatical ranking form. And while I'm scrolling there, of course, because there's 3 faculty and 3 administrators who are ranking this, it's useful to make both constituencies happy with your proposal, right? So having a little bit of something in there that make faculty um, think your project is great, and also for administrators think your faculty is great. So again, we got our ranking. No, we had a review form before. Now this is the ranking form. So whoever's ranking your form is going to write your name there and the date that they're ranking you, and they will be scoring based on these 7 criteria. So that the plan of work relates significantly to your professional assignment. The plan of work will greatly enhance the applicant's background and improve professional competence. There's a couple more here that you can read for yourself. You want to make sure that there's benefit, benefit, benefit. So it's a huge part of the project. So 15 points for benefiting students, 15 points for benefiting colleagues or the department, 15 points for benefiting the college. So because this is a huge part of the project that can make or break how well you do, you want to make sure to focus on that. And this is where those letters of support become really important, because the more letters of support you have, the more thorough that those letters of support are, it's easier to give you a higher score in these 3 categories, because we're getting not only information from your proposal suggesting how it will benefit those 3 areas, but also we're hearing it directly from your colleagues or from your department chairs or from other people in the college. So that will really be helpful here. And that's something that, of course, you have to get ahead of. So you can't save it to the last minute asking for letters of support. So know when the deadline is for the application, right? So for this year, it's November 15th, 2022. And start writing your proposal and sending like an abstract at least to people so that you can get those letters of support more quickly. All right, so by the end, the only section that's not worth 15 points is this last section. It's worth 10 points. It's just to make sure the plan of work is thorough and complete and definitely worth funding. All right, so once this is scored, like I said earlier, we'll get together, the PDC will get together and share our scores for all the applicants, and we'll take everyone that's above 80, or rather, everyone that's 80 and above, and compare the scores and see who ranks at the top. All applicants will be notified in writing by the chair of the decisions. So if you got recommended, of course, we'll let you know. And if you didn't get recommended, we'll still let you know. And we'll also share the scores too, so that if you want to apply again in a future year, you know what your score was and you have a goal for what you might be able to improve on. All right, so the next section, approved activities. So I'm not going to go through this one in detail, but just know that these are sort of the general 3 categories of what's typical for sabbaticals, but it doesn't have to be restricted to these 3. So you can indicate on the form if yours falls under an other category. And something important to note is expectations when you finish sabbatical leave. So if you do get awarded sabbatical, you've gone through it, you should know what you need to know upon your arrival back to the college. So when you return, you're required to submit to the chancellor in writing 2 copies of a report that details the outcome of your leave. You can see this article in the PFT contract for more details. And you also want to send a copy to whoever the chair is of the PDC at that time. And your report will be available on the PDC website for future reference. And so just a heads up, you have to plan on returning to work. This is what's more in more detail in Article 26 of the contract. You need to plan on returning to work back at Merit to teach at least 2 times the length of what your sabbatical was. So if you took a semester sabbatical, you're contracted to at least come back and work for one more year for Merit College. If you take a year-long sabbatical, that means you are obligated for 2 years. So this is just something I want to note here because when you're on sabbatical, it's possible that you make new connections, maybe you even get job offers or job opportunities pop up, and you just got to know that you can't just take those opportunities um, because the college is expecting you to come back and use your new knowledge to benefit the students in the college, etc. So you won't be able to take those opportunities yet, but just something important to think about. One more thing. So to get the highest score that you can on step two, something that I recommend is actually when you're done writing your proposal, print out a couple of these ranking forms or send them electronically to some colleagues who are willing to look through and actually score you. So almost like a practice round, have someone score you and provide you feedback on where your weak points are, what can be improved or tightened up. And by doing this before you send in your application, you're going to most likely make a bigger splash or impression on the professional development committee. All right, so here's the professional development committee's leave timeline. So all the steps, pretty much all the steps that are involved for this application year. So there would have been an announcement already for the number of sabbaticals available. Um, there's a sabbatical orientation workshop held every year for sabbaticals, well, when sabbaticals are available. Most importantly, the application submission deadline is there. When the PDC is reviewing sabbaticals, the deadline for that is December 6th, and that is also the deadline when we'll send our recommendations to the college president, or one recommendation if there's only one sabbatical, but in this case we'll have two. Then by December 15th, all applicants will know their scores and who was recommended and who was not. Sometime later in December, the college president will forward the recommendation to the chancellor's office. As long as they approve it, then they'll bring it down the next step of the process. Then in January, that's when the vice chancellor and the staff development officer will announce who's been awarded sabbatical. But don't let that fool you totally, because yes, you start to kind of get awarded the sabbatical, yes, right there, and you get the contract also in January, but the final approval is the Board of Trustees, and that is in February or March. So that's when things are really, that's when it's sent to the Board of Trustees actually, and then March or April, excuse me, is when the Board of Trustees finally approves the sabbatical. So this is when you'll know for sure. All right, so I think that's pretty much all that I want to cover in this brief sabbatical orientation workshop. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the current Professional Development Committee Chair. This year it's me, John Rodriguez, but if you're watching this video in a future year, just make sure to look at the PDC website for more current information about who's in charge there. All right, hope this was helpful. Thanks.